This is la Nueva Voce. I'm live with Viva Voce.
What's going on, world? We rocking with Oh Shit is Jada. Good shout out to Miss Viva Voce, my man Abel from Dale Duro Record. Ya tú sabes que lo que estamos activos 24/7. Oh Shit is Jada, El Triángulo. Ya tú sabes la serie coming soon. Par de vainitas más. Yo soy Dominicano documentary. You know, behind the scenes type of shit. Dale Duro. Much love. 100.
Wait, estamos aquí. Dream Breakers on the beats. Okay. Este pa' los gangsters y pa' todos los killers. Este pa' los hustlers y pa' todos los dealers. Este pa' los haters, pa' que siempre envidien. Cualquiera la hace que del medio se quite. It's Plinio, you already know. Right now you live and direct with Miss Viva Voce. So stay tuned, suckers.
Miss V, can I say Miss V?
That's good, that's
there
good.
There you go. So, yo, y'all already know, Don D, La Voz, estamos activos. Washington Heights, man. We in the Bronx, live and direct with Miss V. MadAmps en la casa. Tenemos Manhattan, Mr. V. You already know, man. We here working, man. Grind season. Don D, La Voz, Mr. Freak Show.
It's your boy, Sky High Jovii. Catch me at I am Sky High Jovii on that IG wave. You already know, follow my man Zack, St. Nick. Dominican is in the building, you got a motherfucking problem. Shout out MadAmps, Dale Duro Records, Miss Viva Voce.
This is Zack, St. Nick. We on the scene with Miss Viva Voce. You know what I'm saying? A little after production interview here real quick. And we just finished shooting the video for Now You Got a Problem, Washington Heights, a feature with MadAmps, my man Tribes, and my man Bravo from Dykeman. Mr. Dale Duro's in the building, that's my man. You know what I'm saying? And I'm freezing, as you can see, because I keep, you know what I'm saying, shaking. I got a little cold, but it's gonna be a great video. When you watch it, you're gonna enjoy it. It's a big movement, it's wonderful. The things that we got going for this neighborhood and for the, you know, neighboring neighborhoods is a good thing, is a good look, so be on the lookout for that. And hold up, before you go somewhere, let me see the CD real quick. If you don't have that in your motherfucking CD player, add that to your shit, nigga. And if you don't got the CD, if you ain't see it, me personally, and I ain't give it to you personally, go to thatpiff.com, go to thatcrack.com, and just search me. Google me, nigga, that's it. Zack St. Nick, I'm out of here.
Here you go, New Crack City.
New Crack City, that's me. Hold up.
Nigga, who are you? Huh? I don't give a fuck about your crew. No, I don't really.
Hi, I'm Miss Viva Voce here at the WHIN by Any Means 2.5 event at Agua Roja Lounge in Uptown, Dykeman, NYC. We're here at this event to witness new talent from Washington Heights and inward. Let's take a look.
I'm in love with the la-la, sorta like a mellow. Keep a gut full of brown lungs with the best smoke. Blowing on that loud, can't you tell by the echoes? Shorty know if she can't roll, then she can't roll. I'm twisted like a pretzel, higher than a bitch. Rolling like a Rasta, lighting up a couple spliffs. Bumping that Marley, stay higher than the mofo. Sound gross, but we sticky green like moguls. Blowing 10, never Ocho. You the man, nigga, no. Telly blow them grams till I'm floating like a robo. Niggas get salty cause I'm seasoned like a double, but I say it to your face, you a sucker like a bobo. Purple haze in the cup, that shit stay in my blunts. Rolling Ozies, wicked glory, nigga, we be in the
Teddy Floyd.
Sasha.
The mayor of Washington Heights, Mike D.P. Jones.
Cody DCs.
Wonky.
And we are
WHIN.
By Any Means, and we're missing LED Black, Ori, Iran, and Emily from Uptown Girls, NYC. WHIN 3 Event is a collective of a lot of artists getting together to perform in obvious venues that we practically cannot get by ourselves, and just spreading that love, pretty much.
February 28th at Negro Claro. Doors open at 7, show starts at 8 o'clock, no Dominican time.
Negro Claro is located on 3805 10th Avenue on the corner of 204th Street.
Who's involved in the WHIN 3 event?
A number of people, a lot of artists, spoken word poets, sponsors, all local and from far off locations, and vendors, up and coming vendors, clothing lines, bakeries, etc., etc. We're all going to be part of this event.
We're having the WHIN 3 event to connect people to one another. The WHIN 3 event is to get not only your art out there, but also your work.
Who's hosting the WHIN 3 events?
Well, I am. Go by the name of Mike D.P. Jones, the mayor of Washington Heights, alongside the funniest man on Instagram, funniest man in Washington Heights, my brother from another mother. He goes by the name of Emas.
We're gonna be rocking till 4 o'clock in the morning.
$10 to get in.
$10 to get in.
Yeah, first drink, $10 to get in. First drink on her.
First 50 to come here. We're gonna give them free shirts on us.
Free t-shirts. We're gonna have La Mama Juana Típica giving out drink tickets and giving out
So you could get
drinks. So we're gonna have
saucy.
beautiful Mama Juana models giving
So
out.
you could get saucy.
Right. We're not gonna have a red carpet. We're
So
gonna
you
have
get
a
saucy.
blue corner.
That's actually gonna be hosted by one of my lovely, lovely sisters, Miss Viva Voce.
What's her name? What's her name?
Miss Viva Voce.
This is Miss Viva Voce. I'm here with a rocking new band straight from Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic, called Metropolis, who just finished filming their new first single, Es Mejor Solo. So guys, tell us cómo se llaman ustedes. Start by saying your name.
Yo me llamo Adna.
Mi nombre es Brian.
Mi nombre es Emil.
When can we expect an album from Metropolis?
Bueno, para fines de este año ya creo que el álbum estará totalmente preparado ya y algunos videos más, tal vez, unos covers.
Y en iTunes, claro.
Ah, claro.
Nos pueden también en YouTube, tenemos varios covers también que pueden entrar, visitar.
Exacto.
Nuestro YouTube es Metropolis Music RD, así mismo lo buscan en YouTube y ahí aparecemos.
Ok, ¿y en Facebook?
Estamos en Facebook en Metropolis Music RD y en Twitter Metropolis RD Music.
All right, well, thank you.
MOS.
Well, guys, thank you so much for giving me this interview. Wish you guys the best success.
Thanks.
Stay tuned for Metropolis' new music video, Es Mejor Solo, right here on Miss Viva Voce.
Salga eso.
Here with director of the short film Scratch and Blow, Angel Rivera. Angel, can you tell us where everybody can find any of your information, your films, social media? Where can they find your work?
My work's currently on Vimeo. My name is Angel Rivera, and I'm live and direct with Miss Viva Voce.
John R. Peralta, actor, entrepreneur, and basically we're here to talk about what he's been doing today. He's on set on the short film, Scratch and Blow. So how's been the experience today?
It's excellent, you know, like getting to work with the next generation of filmmakers. You know, no project is too big or too small to take part in. And Angel Rivera is somebody that's like on the rise, and he has an amazing young crew that they got amazing chemistry, and it was fun, you know. It's been a good project. It's something nice to get into and look forward to like seeing the expansion of this project in the next few months.
Is this your first time working with Angel Rivera?
Yeah, it is, and I think there's going to be more times that we're going to work. I think it's going to be the first of many. Yes, definitely.
So you also star in a new upcoming film, Trouble in the Heights.
I'm very excited about that, Trouble in the Heights. You're premiering in the United Palace, and for us to be like the first film in like decades that's been shown there, I'm very blessed and privileged to be experiencing this moment with this film, this project, and I'm very thankful.
How did you get the role of Dooley?
Okay, that's a really awesome, question, because Dooley, the character Dooley, I accidentally found out about the film Jovii because I was talking to one of my friends who's an actor. He told me, yeah, you should try to get in there, John. And I was like, oh my God. So I called my manager, Robin Ziegler, and she was able to get in contact with Judy Henderson, and she just was able to work her magic, and I got an audition for Dooley, and when I did, I just made sure I was prepared. I made sure I knew my stuff, and then I got a call back. Called me back in for tea, which turned out to be International Peace Roll, and I went in and I auditioned for tea, and I was like, okay, good, I got 2 shots. I got a shot with Dooley and I got a shot with Dee. So when I got the phone call, man, I was ecstatic. I was ecstatic. I was really happy.
So moving a little bit from acting aside, I see that you're a young entrepreneur. You have your own business, Dynamic NYC Tours LLC. How were you consumed by the idea of providing exclusive sightseeing experiences with top-of-the-line service to people visiting in New York City?
You know, as an actor, one of the toughest things for us is to maintain a steady job. And one of the reasons that is because we have to have a very flexible schedule. So what ends up happening is that you start getting fired often. And if anybody's out there and is an actor knows what I'm talking about, because you just always will leave that job for that one opportunity for that audition. And I experienced that a lot. And I had the opportunity to get a license as a New York City tour guide. And I didn't know that it was gonna open up such a opportunity to just explore New York, discover the history in the city, and just see New York City from a different point of view.
Thank you so much, John.
Thank you, Ms. Viva Voce.
much.
It's a pleasure. Hi, my name is John Rafael Peralta, and I'm on set live with Miss Viva Voce. Check it out, tune in, log on, subscribe to the RSS feed. We bringing it live. Mad love. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Miss Viva Voce, chatting it up with Lorenzo, screenwriter of the upcoming film Wild Cowboys, which was also directed by Jesse Terrero. So Lorenzo, what can you tell us a little bit on what's brewing with the Wild Cowboys?
It's been an endeavor. It's been a long time researching, and I've been writing it for about 3 years now. It's not your standard 120-minute page screenplay. It's about 720 pages right now. And we initially thought about making it into a mini-series, but there's been talks now about it possibly being just a feature film. But that's a conversation to be had. But I can say it's chock full of a lot of real things that happen in the Heights, the history of New York City, history of the Heights, and conversations I've had with the gangsters themselves. And it's going to be a great film.
Is there any other projects outside of Wild Cowboys that you're working on right now?
I'm also working on a documentary on Wild Cowboys called Wanted Wild Cowboys, and it involves a lot of interviews with the gangsters themselves, with people from the community, people who were associated with them, people who knew them, and working with Duro Records on that as well. Actually, they have a couple of songs that they're putting into that documentary. So.
Well, thank you so much, Lorenzo.
Absolutely, anytime.
You heard it first from Ms. Word of Mouth herself.
What's up? I'm Lorenzo Collado, and we're live and ready with Miss Viva Voce.
Hi, I'm Miss Viva Voce here with Kareem Savinon, one of the stars of the upcoming film Trouble in the Heights. Kareem, great performance.
Thank you so much. Thank you so
How
much.
did it feel being the guy stuck trying to get away and you can't?
Oh man, you know what? It didn't feel good, I guess, while we portrayed it, but for the most part, just filming that movie was amazing. It's amazing to be here in Washington Heights and 175th Street and Broadway, my stomping grounds, and premiering a piece of work that was created through a lot of hard dedication and sweat and the whole nine. So I'm very proud.
But at the end of the day, it paid off because you got the support of the community, from everyone.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. Beautiful.
Well, Kareem, thank you so much for giving me
Thank
time.
you for having me.
Congratulations, great performance.
Dale duro a todo. Kareem Savinon, and I'm live and direct with Miss Viva Voce right here, live. Mira, live.
So, Mr. Bravo, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where do you come from?
I'm Dominican American. Both my parents are Dominican. I was born here, Uptown, Manhattan, Dyckman, Washington Heights area. I consider myself very artistic, very into the entertainment side of the whole music aspect. It ain't just grabbing the mic and rapping. It ain't just doing the beat and letting people hear it. It's all about entertaining the people, making them want more.
Fudgy baby. It goes. Hi hater, I'm back in the lab with a vengeance. Soon as I steps in, it's like the leeching of the world's most lethal of lethal weapons. I'll annihilator, violator, like no props. He fucking with me's not happening. Like being on a roller coaster, getting a blow job. I go in like a midget, dick and harder. Then to the mistresses, I'm exquisite with this shit. I spit like, dude, what the fuck do you think this is? I'm playing. I come from the bottom of the bottom, I'm just saying. There's dudes in this goddamn game that are unavoidable. I'm done paying. Been there, done that. Spitting hella raps into rug rats. I popped the lock, I got locked by cops and then damn.